Hello, my dear friends. Tonight you are standing on a rain-slicked dock in 16th century Amsterdam, and in the palm of your hand rests not a flower, but a dense, unassuming brown bowl, still caked with the foreign soil of the Ottoman Empire. This is the quiet, humble beginning of a madness that will grip an entire nation, a story not of petals and perfumes, but of dirt, debt, and dazzling delusion. You probably wouldn't survive the financial and social ruin that followed this little bulb's arrival, where a single misstep could erase a family's fortune overnight. It was a time of spectacular highs and devastating, silent lows. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your quiet support means the world. Now imagine the scent of damp earth and distant salt spray, the feeling of that heavy, hopeful bulb in your hand. Get cozy, pull the blankets up a little higher. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The object in your hand feels heavier than it looks. It's a tight, dense little globe, its skin a papery, dusty brown, flaking away under your thumb. It doesn't smell of flowers or of riches. It smells of the earth, of a cellar, of damp soil, of a long and lonely journey in the dark belly of a ship. This is the tulip. Not the majestic, painted lady of the garden, but the raw, unglamorous promise of it. You're standing on the docks as a crate is pried open, and this is what tumbles out, nestled in straw and dirt. Around you, the air is thick with the smells of a thriving port, wet rope, tar, the sharp tang of herring from a nearby stall, and the ever-present, low-tide scent of the canals. Men in dark, practical woolens murmur in Dutch, their voices low and serious. They aren't looking at this bulb as you are. They are looking through it, into the future. They see a mansion, a new carriage, a portrait of themselves painted by a master. They see a way up. This is the central illusion that will fuel an entire nation's fever dream. Belief that this ugly, common-looking thing holds within it the key to unimaginable wealth. The glamour is all in the imagination. It's a whispered rumor that traveled faster than the ship that carried the bulbs. A story of a flower from the Sultan's garden so beautiful it could make a man weep. A flower whose petals held colours never before seen in the grey, sober landscape of the Netherlands. A flower that was not just a plant, but a status symbol more potent than silk or spice. In your mind's eye, you can almost see it, a streak of crimson on a field of white, a feathering of purple so deep it's almost black. This is what the merchants are buying. Not the lumpy, dirt-stained object in your hand, but the myth it represents. But let's pull back from that intoxicating dream for a moment and focus on the shocking, almost comical reality of the bulb itself. It looks, for all the world, like an onion. A slightly unusual, pointy onion, perhaps, but an onion nonetheless. And this isn't just a passing resemblance. It's a dangerous one. Imagine a sailor, just off a long voyage from the Levant. He's been paid, and as a small bonus, his captain gives him one of these curious new bulbs, thinking it a rare and exotic plant for his garden. The sailor, however, has simpler needs. He's hungry. He sees a fancy onion. Back at his rented room, he thinks of the fresh herring he just bought. He peels the papery skin from the bulb, the layers coming away with a crisp, dry rustle. He takes his knife, chops it on a wooden board, its flesh dense and white. He mixes the raw, diced pieces with his fish, admiring the sharp, pungent smell. He eats it. Every last bite. In doing so, he has just consumed the equivalent of a skilled craftsman's entire yearly income. He has eaten a house. He has devoured a small fortune without ever knowing it existed, simply because the reality of the object, its appearance, its texture, its place in the world of edible roots was so profoundly disconnected from its imagined value. This is the part that history books often glide over. The sheer, physical mundanity of the object that caused the mania. The shocking truth wasn't just the astronomical prices, but that those prices were attached to something so profoundly, deceptively ordinary. It's one thing to desire a diamond or a bar of gold. Their value is tied to a visible, tangible brilliance. It's another thing entirely to stake your entire existence on something that could be so easily mistaken for a common vegetable. So why? Why would a society of famously practical, sober, and business-minded people fall for it? Because the Dutch of the Golden Age understood something profound about value. They were masters of transformation. They had transformed the sea into land with their dikes and polders. They transformed the wind into industrial power with their mills. They saw the world not just for what it was, but for what it could become. This unassuming brown bulb was the ultimate symbol of that worldview. It was pure potential. Its value wasn't in its present state, but in its future promise of beauty, of novelty, and most importantly, of profit. To invest in a tulip bulb was an act of faith. It was faith in the market, faith in the tastes of the wealthy, and faith in the idea that you could, with the right timing and a bit of luck, turn dirt into gold. The bulb's homeliness wasn't a bug. It was a feature. It was the ultimate testament to the power of speculation, where the story you tell about a thing becomes more valuable than the thing itself. As you stand there on that damp dock, you close your hand around the bulb. You can feel its solid reality, but you can also feel the invisible weight of all those dreams, all that frantic, hopeful ambition being projected onto it. This single, earthy object is a seed, not just for a flower, but for a whole new kind of economy. But to truly understand the world this seed is about to sprout in, you must first understand the manicured, perfumed, and fiercely protected spaces where its flower will eventually bloom, the immaculate gardens of the rich. And just beyond the walls of those perfect gardens, a constant, foul-smelling battle is being waged. You leave the docks, the phantom weight of that bulb still in your memory, and follow the flow of commerce into the heart of the city. The narrow streets are canyons of tall, gabled houses that lean against each other like tired friends. And it's here, tucked behind one of these proud merchant homes, that you find the sanctuary we spoke of. You push open a heavy wooden gate, and the chaotic symphony of the city, the clatter of wooden shoes on cobblestone, the cry of a vendor, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer is instantly muffled. You have stepped into a world of profound and deliberate silence. This is the Dutch garden, the glorious illusion of perfect, controllable nature. Before you is a space defined by straight lines and sharp angles. The garden is a living painting, a testament to geometry and control. Low, clipped box hedges create intricate, swirling patterns, like green embroidery on the dark, rich soil. The paths are laid with crushed seashells or stark white gravel, crunching softly underfoot with each step you take. Everything has its place. There is no wild, untamed growth here. No romantic tangle of vines. This is nature subdued, improved, perfected by the hand of man. And the scent at first, it is overwhelmingly clean. It's the smell of damp earth after a light rain, the fresh, green scent of cut stems, and the delicate, almost shy fragrance of the expensive, imported flowers that dot the beds in careful, color-coordinated arrangements. You see fritillaries with their checkerboard petals and the deep, royal blues of irises. It is an oasis of order, a quiet boast of the owner's ability to tame the wild world and display it for his own private pleasure. This garden is the physical manifestation of the Dutch Golden Age spirit. It says, "Look at what I have built. Look at the chaos I have held at bay. Every perfectly pruned shrub, every weedless flower bed, is a symbol of a mind that values precision, order, and mastery over the natural world. This is the same impulse that built the dikes to hold back the sea, the same meticulousness that allowed their cartographers to map the entire known world. The garden is a microcosm of their society, prosperous, orderly, and fiercely proud of its ability to create wealth and beauty out of mud and water. Breathe it in, this air of quiet victory, of serene, cultivated perfection. It's intoxicating. It feels stable, clean, and real. But now, you walk towards the back of this perfect little paradise, towards the high brick wall that separates it from the rest of Amsterdam. As you get closer, a breeze stirs the leaves of a tall linden tree, and it carries with it another smell. A scent so powerful, so foul and pervasive, that it makes the delicate perfume of the flowers seem like a desperate lie. It is the shocking reality of the city, the truth, that this entire garden was built to deny. It is the stench of the canal. It's a thick, complex odor, both sour and acrid. It's the smell of decay, of stagnant water choked with human and industrial life. You can almost pick out the individual notes in this foul perfume: the raw sewage from hundreds of homes, the chemical tang of runoff from the cloth dyers, the putrid slick of waste from a nearby tannery, and the soft underlying rot of discarded vegetable matter and animal carcasses. This isn't just water, it's the city's toilet and its garbage dump, all in one. This is the visceral truth that lurks just feet from the pristine gravel paths and the perfectly spaced flower beds. The glorious garden is an island, a fortress of fragrance besieged by an ocean of filth. Wealthy merchant who owns this paradise can hear the gentle lap of that foul water against the brickwork day and night. The shocking reality is that the 16th and 17th centuries, for all their artistic genius and commercial innovation, were a period of almost unimaginable public squalor. There were no sewer systems. The same beautiful canals that you see in paintings, the ones reflecting the gabled houses and carrying picturesque boats, were the main arteries for all the city's waste. Every chamber pot was emptied into them, every bit of trash tossed from a window found its way there. The water, in some places, would have been thick enough to almost walk on. So why did they live like this? Why would a society so obsessed with cleanliness in their homes famous for scrubbing their stoops and polishing their floors tolerate such public filth? The answer lies in their worldview. The distinction between public and private space was absolute. Your home, your garden, that was your domain, a reflection of your soul and your status. You were responsible for its order and purity. The world outside your walls, however, was a chaotic, shared space. The canals were a practical necessity, the city's circulatory system for both goods and garbage. To try and clean them would have been like trying to tidy the ocean. It was simply the way the world was. The garden's perfection, therefore, wasn't hypocritical, it was a defiant act. It was a statement of power. The owner was saying, the world outside may be a stinking, chaotic mess, but in here, within these walls that my fortune has built, I can create heaven. I can afford to buy clean air. The immense value placed on a fragrant flower, a hyacinth, a lily, and soon the tulip makes perfect sense in this context. A beautiful scent was not just a luxury, it was a weapon. It was a shield against the olfactory assault of daily life. The more delicate and pure the fragrance, the more powerful the statement. And this battle against the ever-present stench of reality wasn't just fought in the garden. It was waged on a much more personal, intimate level, with cloths and pomanders and perfumed gloves, creating a fragrant bubble around the bodies of the wealthy themselves. You leave the garden, its memory a strange blend of floral perfume and canal stench, and step through a heavy oak door into the merchant's house itself. The air inside is still, thick, and surprisingly dark after the relative brightness of the garden. Heavy velvet curtains block out much of the light, and the first thing you notice is not what you see, but what you smell. The air is saturated with a potent, almost overwhelming fragrance. It's not the fresh, living scent of the garden's flowers, but something much heavier, more complex and artificial. It's a dense cloud of musk, of ambergris, of cloves and cinnamon and dried lavender, all mingling with the waxy smell of beeswax polished wood. This is the glamorous illusion of the wealthy Dutch interior, a space that smells of exotic spices, of faraway lands, of money. You are standing in the main reception room. The floor is a checkerboard of black and white marble tiles, so polished you can see the faint, distorted reflection of the ceiling beams above. A massive tapestry, depicting a biblical scene in rich but fading colors, covers one wall, insulating against the damp and the chill. The furniture is dark, heavy, and ornately carved. A towering cabinet, inlaid with mother-of-pearl, stands against one wall, a silent testament to the owner's fortune. The merchant and his wife are here to greet you. He is a stout man in a starched white ruff that looks as stiff and unforgiving as a dinner plate. His wife wears a dress of deep black velvet, the fabric so rich it seems to drink the light. They are the very picture of sober, Protestant wealth, dignified, solid, unmovable. As they draw near, their personal cloud of perfume precedes them, a fragrant announcement of their arrival. It's the scent of power, of cleanliness, of having risen above the common muck. This scented bubble is a carefully constructed fade. It's an aromatic armor. And now, as you get closer, you notice the shocking reality it is designed to hide. Beneath the heavy layer of musk and spice, there is another, more primal scent. It is the faint, unmistakable smell of an unwashed human body. Not the ripe, healthy sweat of a laborer, but a stale, sour odor. The truth is, for all their scrubbed floors and polished stoops, the 16th century Dutch, like most Europeans of the era, did not bathe, not in the way we understand it. At least, full body immersion in water was considered dangerous, even decadent. It was believed that water could open the pores and let in disease, the dreaded miasma or bad air that they thought caused everything from the common cold to the plague. The merchant's starched linen ruff isn't just a fashion statement, it is, in a way, his version of a bath. Wealthy would change their linen undergarment shirts, shifts and collars frequently. This was considered the height of personal hygiene. The clean, white linen against the skin was believed to draw out the body's impurities and odors. The outer layers of clothing, the expensive velvets and wools, might be worn for weeks or months on end, rarely if ever washed. They were spun and aired out, but the accumulated sweat and skin oils would have become deeply embedded in the fabric. To combat this, they didn't wash their bodies, they perfumed their world. This is the why behind the fragrant assault. That heavy, spicy perfume isn't just for pleasure, it's a necessity. It's a form of olfactory warfare against their own bodies. A merchant's wife might carry a pomander, a small, perforated metal ball filled with a solid paste of ambergris, musk and spices. She holds it to her nose when walking through the street to ward off the stench, but she also uses it to mask her own scent. The merchant might have gloves treated with fragrant oils, so that when he raises his hand to greet someone, he offers a scent of civet and rosewater instead of the smell of his own skin. They are living inside a personal perfume cloud, a desperate attempt to create the illusion of purity in a world where true cleanliness, as we know it, was seen as a medical risk. The shocking reality is that this immaculate house, with its gleaming floors and perfumed air, is inhabited by people who likely hadn't had a proper bath in years. Their wealth didn't buy them cleanliness, it bought them the tools to expertly disguise the lack of it. This disconnect between appearance and reality is crucial. It's the same logic we saw with the tulip bulb. The value is in the surface, the story, the illusion you present to the world. A clean collar and a cloud of expensive perfume told the world you were healthy, wealthy, and pure, even if the reality beneath was far more organic. And this obsession with controlling perception, with creating a beautiful, fragrant surface, is about to be projected onto the tulip itself. The flower's beauty won't just be a matter of simple aesthetics. It will become a canvas for the most bizarre and desirable form of imperfection, a beautiful sickness that turns a simple flower into a masterpiece of living art. The most prized tulips won't be the pure, solid-coloured ones, but the ones that are beautifully, unpredictably broken. You find yourself back in that meticulously ordered garden, but this time you are kneeling on the damp earth, leaning in close to a single, spectacular flower. This is it. This is the tulip that is driving men mad. It stands on a tall, elegant stem, its petals forming a perfect cup against the grey Dutch sky, but it is the colour that stops your breath. It is not a solid red or a simple yellow. The petals are a canvas of feathered, flamed and streaked patterns. A base of pure, creamy white is broken by violent, intricate slashes of deep crimson, like blood flicked from a painter's brush. Another next to it has a base of sunny yellow, tattooed with delicate, feathery veins of lilac that bleed into the edges. This is a broken tulip, and it is the absolute pinnacle of beauty, the most desired object in the entire United Provinces. This is the glorious illusion that these patterns are a mark of nature's supreme artistry, a rare and unpredictable gift. Growers and collectors give them poetic, heroic names: Semper Augustus Viceroy, Admiral van der Eyck. These are not just flowers, they are celebrities. They are living jewels. The patterns are so complex, so unique to each bulb, that no two flowers are ever exactly alike. This uniqueness is the source of their incredible value. A solid-coloured tulip, a breeder as they call it, is lovely, but common. It is predictable, but a broken tulip that is a masterpiece. It is a mystery, a one-of-a-kind creation that confers instant status on its owner. Owning a Semper Augustus is like owning a Rembrandt before he has even finished the painting. It is a raw, living piece of art, and its beauty feels like a miracle. But now, let's look closer. Let's peel back the petals of this beautiful illusion and stare at the shocking reality underneath. You are not looking at a work of art. You are looking at a disease. Beautiful, chaotic patterns that made these tulips worth more than their weight in gold are the symptoms of a viral infection. We now know it as the tulip-breaking virus, a mosaic virus spread by aphids, the tiny green peach potato aphid to be precise. The virus infects the bulb and interferes with the production of the flower's pigment, the anthocyanin. It causes the colour to be suppressed in irregular patches, allowing the underlying white or yellow colour of the petal to show through. The result is those stunningly beautiful flames and feathers. The most prized flower in the nation, the object of frenzied speculation and ruinous expense, was, in reality, a sick, weakened plant. This is the grotesque and fascinating truth at the heart of tulip mania. The very quality that made the flower so valuable, its beautiful, unpredictable brokenness, was a symptom of its decline. The virus not only affected the color, but it also weakened the bulb itself. Each year, an infected bulb would produce a less vigorous flower. The offsets, the smaller bulbs that grew from the main one, would also be infected, but they would be smaller and weaker still. The Semper Augustus, the most famous and expensive tulip of all time, was so weakened by its beautiful disease that it could barely propagate. This is what made it so impossibly rare. Its beauty was literally killing it. Why didn't they know? Why did these master horticulturalists, these men who studied and catalogued the natural world with such precision, celebrate a sickness? The reason lies in their understanding of the world. The concept of a virus was completely unknown. It was a form of life, too small for them to even imagine, let alone see. In the absence of a scientific explanation, they came up with their own theories rooted in a worldview that saw nature as a far more mysterious and unstable force. Some believed it was the soil. They would try different mixtures of earth, adding plaster, rubble, even paint pigments, hoping to encourage the break. Others believed it was the weather, or the phase of the moon. The most common belief was that it was a natural process of maturation. A plain, solid-coloured breeder tulip would, after several years, finally break and reveal its true, more beautiful colours, like a floral puberty. This belief was essential to the market. It created a system where a common, relatively cheap breeder bulb could be bought with the hope that it might, one day, spontaneously transform into a priceless treasure. Turned gardening into a lottery. You would plant your solid red tulips year after year, waiting and hoping for the season when one of them would bloom with the miraculous streaks of white that would make your fortune. The reality, of course, was that this almost never happened. The break was not a maturation, it was an infection. For a breeder to break, it had to be infected by an aphid that had already fed on a broken, diseased tulip nearby. The whole process was random, uncontrollable, and profoundly misunderstood. They were trading in beautiful, dying things. The entire market was built on a genetic flaw, a glorious sickness they mistook for art. And the speculation wasn't just happening in quiet, orderly gardens. The real frenzy was taking place in the dark, smoky, and decidedly unglamorous taverns, where men weren't even trading flowers, but the wind of their promises. You push open the door to a tavern in Harlem, the epicenter of the most frantic trading, and a wall of noise and heat hits you. The air is so thick with piped smoke that the flickering candlelight from the chandeliers barely cuts through the haze, illuminating floating particles of dust and ash. This is ecology, or college, a regular meeting of tulip traders. But it looks less like an academic gathering and more like a riotous party on the edge of chaos. The glamorous illusion is that these are sophisticated financiers, the 17th century equivalent of Wall Street traders making calculated risks in a burgeoning futures market. You imagine men in sober black, poring over contracts, their faces grim with the weight of numbers and projections. You expect the quiet, tense hum of high finance. The room is packed with men from every walk of life. You see a wealthy merchant in his fine woolen coat, his ruff slightly wilted in the heat, standing shoulder to shoulder with a baker, his forearms still dusted with flour. A weaver, his fingers stained with indigo, shouts a bid to a grim-faced magistrate. They are all here, levelled by a common, feverish dream. The noise is a deafening babble of Dutch, punctuated by the clatter of beer steins on wooden tables and explosive bursts of laughter. The floor is slick with spilled beer and littered with discarded clay pipes. In the corner, a man plays a jaunter, off-key tune on a fiddle, adding to the general din. This is not the clean, geometric order of the Dutch garden. This is human nature at its most raw, greedy, and unleashed. This is the engine room of tulip mania, and it smells of stale beer, sweat, and burning tobacco. As your eyes adjust to the gloom, you begin to understand the shocking reality of what is happening here. They are not trading flowers. They are not even trading bulbs. The actual tulip bulbs are planted safely in the ground, dormant for the winter. It would be impossible and foolish to dig them up. Instead, they are trading pieces of paper. They are trading promises. This is what they called Windandalth wind trade. A man sells a bulb he does not own to a man who does not have the money to pay for it, with the bulb to be delivered and paid for months later, in the spring. No physical object changes hands. No cash is laid on the table. It is a market built entirely on trust and speculation, fueled by cheap gin and boundless optimism. You watch as a deal goes down. A trader, his face flushed with drink and excitement, holds up a piece of paper, a hastily scribbled note describing a single Gouda tulip bulb. He declares a starting price. The bidding is fast and furious, a series of shouts and hand gestures across the smoky room. The price climbs higher and higher, far beyond what the flower could ever be considered intrinsically worth. The final bidder, a young clerk who probably earns 30 guilders a month, agrees to pay 3,000 guilders for this single, unseen bulb. He doesn't have 3,000 guilders. He has no intention of ever paying it. His plan is to sell the contract for that same bulb to someone else in a week, or even an hour, for a higher price. He is not buying a flower. He is buying a chance, a lottery ticket. He is betting on the wind. The historical why behind this bizarre scene is a fascinating confluence of social and economic factors. Firstly, this was the dead of winter. For many of the men in this room, weavers, brewers, artisans, work was slow. They had time on their hands and a desire to make extra money. Tulip trade offered a thrilling, accessible alternative to their daily grind. Secondly, the Dutch were comfortable with abstract finance. They had invented stock markets and complex financial instruments for their trading companies, like the VOC. The idea of trading in futures was not entirely alien to them. However, they applied this high finance concept to a common commodity and stripped away all the regulations and formal structures. The colleges in these taverns had their own informal rules, often designed to encourage speculation. Deals were sealed with a toast. A small fee, the wine money, was paid to the college for each transaction, which was then used to buy drinks for everyone present. This created a convivial, party-like atmosphere where it was easy to get swept up in the excitement. Refusing to pay your debt on a tulip contract wasn't a legal issue, it was a social one. You would be shamed and ostracized from the group. This system worked as long as prices were constantly rising, as long as everyone believed they could sell their wind for a profit. It was a game of musical chairs played with imaginary fortunes, and nobody wanted the music to stop. This was not the sober, God-fearing Calvinism that we associate with the Dutch Golden Age. This was something else, a hidden current of wild, communal gambling that pulsed beneath the surface of that famously orderly society. And the artists of the day were watching, ready to capture this fleeting, beautiful, and potentially poisonous world on canvas. You leave the smoky tavern behind, the phantom shouts of the windandals still ringing in your ears, and step into a different kind of workshop. The air here is quiet and smells, not of beer and tobacco, but of linseed oil, turpentine, and the dusty, chalky scent of ground pigments. You are in the studio of a Dutch master, a painter of still lifes. Light from a tall, north-facing window falls across the room, illuminating a scene of carefully arranged opulence. On a table draped with a rich Persian rug sits a silver platter, a half-peeled lemon with its skin spiraling down, a gleaming wine roma, and a skull, a stark memento mori. And there, in a simple ceramic vase, is the star of the show, a perfect, broken tulip, its petals a riot of crimson and white. This is the glamorous illusion, captured for eternity. The painting is a feast for the eyes, a celebration of wealth, beauty, and the fleeting nature of life. The artist has rendered the tulip with breathtaking precision. You can see the delicate, almost translucent texture of the petals, the subtle curve of the stem, the way the light catches on the very edge of a leaf. The flower looks so real, so alive, you feel you could almost reach out and touch it. These paintings were incredibly popular among the wealthy merchants who were fueling the tulip craze. They were a way to possess the beauty of the rarest flowers forever. If you couldn't afford a Semper Augustus bulb, you could at least own its perfect, immortal image. It was the ultimate status symbol, a portrait not of a person, but of their exquisite taste and purchasing power. The painting freezes the flower at its moment of absolute perfection, a beauty that in reality would fade and die in a matter of days. But now, let's look closer at the artist and his subject. Let's uncover the shocking reality behind this painted perfection. The tulip you see in the painting, it probably wasn't in the room. In fact, the artist may have never seen that specific, rare flower in his life. Shocking truth is that many of these magnificent floral still lifes were elaborate fictions, beautiful lies constructed from sketches, memory, and imagination. The rarest and most expensive tulips, like the Viceroy or Semper Augustus, bloomed for only about a week a year in the spring. An artist would be incredibly lucky to have access to one, and he certainly wouldn't be able to afford to buy one himself just to paint it. So how did they create these incredibly realistic portraits of flowers they didn't have? They worked from source material. Botanists and wealthy collectors would commission artists to create detailed, botanically accurate watercolors of the individual flowers in their collections. These were compiled into tulip books, which were like catalogues or inventories of the available varieties. An artist painting a still life would use these tulip books, along with his own sketches of more common flowers, to assemble a fantasy bouquet. He could pick a Semper Augustus from one page, an Admiral Lichens from another, and combine them in a vase with a rose that bloomed in summer and an iris that bloomed in a different season altogether. The bouquets you see in these famous paintings are often impossible floral arrangements that could never have existed in reality. There's an even more visceral truth hidden in the very materials the artist is using. To achieve those vibrant, lifelike colors, the painter is working with a palette of ground-up poisons. Brilliant yellow might be orpiment, a highly toxic arsenic sulfide. That rich, fiery red could be vermilion, derived from mercury. The brilliant white was often lead white, a sweet-tasting but insidiously poisonous compound that artists would have absorbed through their skin or by inadvertently licking their brushes to a fine point. The very act of capturing the flower's beauty was a slow, toxic process. The painter, in his quest to create an illusion of life on canvas, was surrounded by the chemical agents of death. The beautiful painting is a lie, and the materials used to create that lie are literally poisonous. The why behind this artistic deception is rooted in the purpose of the art itself. The goal was not scientific realism, it was symbolic truth. The painting wasn't meant to be a photograph of a real bouquet. It was an allegory, a vanitas. The beautiful, impossible collection of flowers symbolized the fleeting beauty of life. The skull, the watch, the guttering canned leal were reminders of mortality. Half-peeled lemon looked beautiful, but had a sour taste, a reminder that earthly pleasures are deceptive. In this context, the fact that the tulip was a painted illusion only adds another layer to the meaning. It reinforces the idea that the pursuit of earthly beauty and wealth, like the tulip trade itself, is a form of vanity, a beautiful but ultimately empty illusion. The artists weren't trying to trick their patrons, they were collaborating with them in creating a richer, more meaningful fiction. They were painting the idea of the tulip, which, just like in the tavern, was far more powerful than the real thing. But the hunger for these flowers wasn't just about art and money. For some, it was a matter of scientific obsession, leading to its own world of intrigue and bitter rivalry. Leaving the artist's oil-scented studio, you journey to the city of Leyden, a hub of intellectual and scientific inquiry. Here, you enter the hushed, almost sacred grounds of the Hortus Botanicus, one of the oldest botanical gardens in the world. The air is still and studious. You are surrounded by neatly labelled plants from all corners of the globe, a living library of the natural world. This is the domain of the scholar, the botanist. The glamorous illusion here is one of pure, noble science. You picture men of learning, driven by an enlightened quest for knowledge, patiently cultivating, classifying, and studying these new wonders from the East. Theirs is a passion not for money, but for understanding God's creation. At the centre of this story is a man named Carolus Clusius, a brilliant and pioneering botanist who was instrumental in introducing the tulip to the Netherlands. In the late 16th century, he became the director of this very garden. He received his first tulip bulbs as a gift from a diplomat in Constantinople, and he was captivated. He cultivated them not for their commercial potential, but for their scientific interest. He studied their variations, documented their growth, and guarded them jealously. You can imagine him here, a distinguished, grey-bearded figure, walking these same paths, gently tending his precious specimens, his mind filled with Latin names and the quiet satisfaction of discovery. He represents the noble face of the tulips, a rival pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. Let's look past this serene, academic fade and dig into the grubby, all too human reality of scholarly ambition. The shocking truth is that the world of these learned botanists was rife with jealousy, subterfuge, and outright theft. Clusius was famously protective of his bulbs. He saw them as objects of study, not as commodities to be bought and sold. He refused to sell them and gave them away only to a very select circle of fellow scholars. But the beauty of his flowers became legendary. People would come to the garden just to gaze at the incredible tulips blooming in his private, locked section. And that envy soon boiled over into action. One night, under the cover of darkness, thieves crept into the Leyden Hortus. They were not common criminals looking for something to pawn. They were knowledgeable, likely rival collectors or aspiring growers, who knew exactly what they were looking for. They scaled the walls, navigated the garden, and dug up a significant number of Clusius' most prized and rare tulip bulbs. He was devastated. It was a violation of his life's work, a betrayal by the very community he sought to enlighten. This was not an isolated incident. The theft of rare bulbs became a common problem for serious collectors. A man's garden, that symbol of private order and control we explored earlier, became a fortress that had to be guarded against sophisticated, green-fingered criminals. The why behind this ungentlemanly behavior is rooted in the very nature of rarity and desire. Clusius, in his attempt to keep the tulip an exclusive object of scientific study, inadvertently made it one of the most desirable luxury goods in the country. By refusing to sell the bulbs, he created an intense, artificial scarcity. He was trying to protect the plant from commerce, but his actions only fueled the fire of a nascent black market. The men who stole his bulbs weren't just stealing plants, they were stealing the future. They were stealing the genetic source code for potential fortune. This scholarly world was also intensely competitive. Botanist's reputation depended on his collection. Having a rare, undocumented specimen was a major coup. It would earn you respect and correspondence with scholars across Europe. The pressure to acquire new and exotic plants was immense. While Clusius represented the purist, others saw botany and commerce as perfectly compatible. They understood that a plant could be both a scientific wonder and a source of immense profit. The line between a scholar and a speculator began to blur. A man might publish a learned treatise on a new lily variety in one breath and then sell its offsets for an exorbitant price in the next. The noble quest for knowledge was tangled up with the far more basic human desires for status, prestige, and wealth. The very same passions driving the drunken traders in the tavern were at play here in the hallowed halls of academia, just dressed up in finer clothes and spoken in more eloquent Latin. The theft from Clusius' garden was a pivotal moment. It was the symbolic act that released the tulip from the closed world of the scholar and into the open, chaotic marketplace, where its value would be determined not by botanists, but by the frantic bidding of ordinary men who were about to risk everything they had. You now find yourself far from the grand canals of Amsterdam and the learned gardens of Leiden. You are in a small, cramped workshop in the city of Haarlem. The rhythmic clack-clack-clack of a wooden loom fills the small space, a sound so constant it's almost a form of silence. The air smells of damp wool, metal, and the faint, earthy scent of the dyes used to colour the threads. This is the world of the weaver, the skilled artisan, the backbone of the Dutch economy. The glamorous illusion of the Golden Age often focuses on the high-flying merchants and the sea captains, but the true wealth of the nation was built on the shoulders of men like this, who spent their lives in patient, repetitive labour, transforming raw materials into valuable goods. You watch the weaver at his work. His hands, stained with blue from indigo, move with a blur of practiced efficiency, sending the shuttle flying back and forth across the growing expanse of cloth. He is a master of his craft, a respected member of his guild. His life is one of order, skill, and modest prosperity. He owns his loom, his small house, and has enough to feed his family. His world is tangible, solid. He takes wool and, through his labour, creates a physical object of value and utility. He is the very picture of the sober, hard-working Dutchman that history celebrates. He seems grounded, practical, immune to the kind of speculative fever that grips men of high finance. But lean in closer. Look at the man's face, illuminated by the weak light from a small, leaded glass window. His eyes are not on the threads. His focus is elsewhere. There is a distracted, feverish glint in his gaze. Tucked away in a small wooden box on a shelf behind him, nestled in dry sand, is his most precious possession. It is not a tool of his trade or a family heirloom. It is a single tulip bulb. A gouda, perhaps, or a general bowl. It is his lottery ticket. This is the shocking reality. The speculative mania did not just infect the rich, it seeped down through every level of society, capturing the imaginations of ordinary craftsmen who had the most to lose. This weaver has gambled everything on that dormant bulb. To acquire it, he didn't pay with cash he didn't have. Instead, he engaged in a frantic barter of his entire existence. He traded his loom. He traded the tools of his trade, the very source of his livelihood. He might have thrown in his household furniture, a bed, a table, his wife's best pewter plates. In some documented cases, artisans traded their entire workshops, their houses, their life savings, all for a single, promising bulb. They were making an all-or-nothing bet that the price of that bulb would continue its meteoric rise, allowing them to sell it in the spring for a fortune that would free them from the endless clack-clack-clack of the loom forever. He has traded the solid, tangible reality of his life for a fragile, uncertain dream. What could possibly justify such a catastrophic risk? Why is a complex mix of social pressure and desperate hope? For a man like the weaver, social mobility was extremely limited. He was born a weaver, and he would likely die a weaver. His sons would become weavers. The guild system, while providing security, also enforced a rigid social hierarchy. The tulip craze seemed to offer a once-in-a-lifetime chance to leapfrog that system, to shatter the ceiling of his class and become one of the wealthy merchants he saw strolling by the canals. The stories were intoxicating. You've heard of a cobbler who made a fortune, an orphanage that invested its funds and became rich. The tavern talk, which we've already visited, was a powerful engine of this populist hype. It created a feedback loop of success stories, real or imagined, that made the risk seem not only palatable, but logical. Furthermore, the very nature of the barter system made the risk feel less real. When no actual money changes hands, the value becomes abstract. Trading a physical loom for a piece of paper that represents a bulb feels different from handing over a chest full of silver guilders. It's an exchange of one form of potential, the potential to make cloth, for another, the potential for the bulb's price to rise. In the fever of the moment, the bulb's potential seemed infinitely greater. He was convinced he was making a brilliant trade-up, shedding his slow, laborious past for a fast, dazzling future. It was a mass delusion, but for the individual caught within it, it felt like a moment of supreme, exhilarating clarity. He wasn't being foolish. He was being bold. He was seizing an opportunity that God himself must have provided. This mania was profoundly democratic in its reach, seducing the rich and the poor alike. But the participation of women in this frenzy was often hidden, conducted from the shadows and through intermediaries, yet no less significant. You move from the weaver's noisy workshop to the quiet, domestic heart of a prosperous merchant's household. This is the domain of the woman of the house. The glamorous illusion, reinforced by countless Dutch paintings, is of a serene and pious domestic goddess. She is the keeper of the hearth, the guardian of morality and order. We picture her overseeing the polishing of silver, instructing maids, or sitting quietly with her needlework, the very embodiment of private virtue and removal from the grubby world of commerce. Her world is the home, not the marketplace. She is often depicted with keys hanging from her waist, symbolizing her dominion over the household, but it's a power that seems entirely separate from the cut and thrust of financial speculation. Her husband might be away for months at a time on a trading voyage. In his absence, she is the master of this small universe. You see her now, a woman with a strong, intelligent face, dressed in sober but expensive clothing. She moves through her home with an air of quiet authority. The floors gleam, the linens are pristine, and a pot of stew simmers gently over the fire, filling the air with a savory, comforting scent. She is the still point in the turning world of her husband's business, the anchor of stability that makes his risk-taking possible. She is presented as being above the vulgarity of the tulip trade, a calming influence against its feverish excess. But let's pull back the heavy curtain of this domestic ideal and peer into the shocking reality of her involvement. Tucked away in a locked drawer of her large linen press, she keeps a ledger. And in that ledger, written in a neat, precise hand, she tracks the family's most daring and clandestine investments, their tulips. The truth is that women were active and often ruthless participants in the tulip market. Because the law and social custom barred them from the smoke-filled taverns and the trading floors of the exchange, they operated from the shadows, but their influence was profound. A widow, in particular, could be a formidable force. Upon her husband's death, a Dutch woman often inherited control of his business and estate. We have records of widows who took their inheritance and plumbed it into the tulip market with astonishing success. They couldn't go to the colleges themselves, so they operated through male relatives, agents, or notaries. They would send instructions, negotiate prices, and manage complex portfolios of bulbs, all from the privacy of their own homes. For a woman in this era, whose opportunities were so severely restricted, the tulip market was a secret backdoor to financial independence and power. It was a game they could play and win, using their intelligence and acumen in a way society rarely permitted. The quiet, domestic space was not a retreat from the market. It was the hidden headquarters of a savvy speculator. What explains this hidden world of female finance? The why is rooted in the unique structure of Dutch society. While patriarchal, it afforded women more legal and economic rights than in many other parts of Europe. The tradition of the Nakost, or household account book, meant that women were often highly literate and numerate, responsible for managing complex household budgets that could rival a small business. They were trained from a young age in the arts of thrift, management, and value. When their husbands were away, they were not just caretakers, they were acting business partners, empowered to make decisions. This expertise in domestic management was directly transferable to the tulip market. They understood scarcity, value, and timing. They knew how to manage assets. The tulip bulb itself, a domestic, garden-based object, was also more accessible to them. While they couldn't trade shares in the Dutch East India Company, they could certainly cultivate and trade in rare flowers from their own gardens. The mania provided an unprecedented, if temporary, loophole in the patriarchal system. It created a bubble of opportunity where a woman's feminine domain, the garden, and her masculine skills in finance could merge into a potent, fortune-making combination. The image of the pious, non-commercial housewife was a convenient and necessary fiction. It maintained the social order, while behind the scenes, these women were playing the market with a skill that would have impressed the most hardened trader in the tavern. But for all the trading, bartering, and speculating, someone somewhere actually had to do the slow, dirty work of getting these bulbs to grow. We have seen the speculators, the artists, the scholars, and the secret investors. We have seen the bulb as a promise, a symbol, a sickness, and a secret. Now, you must finally confront the thing itself, not as an idea, but as a plant that must be coaxed from the soil. You are on your knees in the cold, damp ground of a commercial tulip field on the outskirts of Haarlem. Glamorous illusion is that of the master grower, the tulip virtuoso. You imagine a man with an almost magical connection to the earth, a green thumb who can turn dirt into priceless blossoms with a knowing touch. His fields are a perfect, orderly tapestry of future wealth, and he is the alchemist overseeing the transformation of base matter into floral gold. It's a clean, romantic image, a man in harmony with nature, reaping the beautiful rewards of his gentle labor. But the reality is anything but clean or gentle. The first thing you notice is the mud. It is a thick, heavy, cold clay, the kind that clings to your boots and your trousers and seems to suck the warmth from your bones. Your back aches from bending over the raised beds of soil. Your fingernails are permanently packed with dirt. This is the shocking reality of cultivation. It is slow, grueling, and filthy work. The air doesn't smell of sweet perfume, it smells of manure, which has been laboriously worked into the soil to provide nourishment. It smells of damp earth and the constant, chilling threat of rot. You are here in the autumn, at planting time. Your hands are raw from handling the bulbs, carefully placing each one a few inches deep in the meticulously prepared bed, pointed end up. The work is repetitive, back-breaking, and fraught with anxiety. After the planting comes the long, anxious wait of the Dutch winter. You must protect these beds, which hold a fortune greater than a king's ransom, from 100 different threats. A harsh, unexpected frost could freeze the bulbs in the ground, turning them to mush. A period of heavy, unceasing rain could drown them, causing the dreaded fire, a fungal disease that rots the bulb from the inside out. And then, there are the pests. You spend your nights worrying about the silent, unseen enemies that live in the dirt. A single mouse, tunneling through a bed, could chew through a dozen bulbs in a night, literally eating a house and a carriage for its dinner. Moles could heave up the earth, exposing the bulbs to the killing frost. The grower's life is one of constant, grinding vigilance against the mundane forces of nature that could wipe out his entire investment in an afternoon. This isn't the romantic dance with nature you imagined. This is a gritty, muddy war. But the most shocking reality of all is the slowness. Frantic trading in the taverns, the windhandle where fortunes were made and lost in an hour, created the illusion of speed, of infinite, instant supply. The physical reality of the tulip is a lesson in profound, agonizing patience. If you were to start from a seed, it could take up to 7 years of careful cultivation before you had a flowering-size bulb. 7 years of weeding, waiting, and protecting before you would even know if the flower was a common breeder or had the potential for a valuable break. This is why most propagation was done through offsets, the little bulblets that form on the main bulb. But even this was a slow process. A valuable broken tulip, weakened by its beautiful virus, might only produce 1 or 2 small offsets a year. These offsets would then need to be grown on for another 1 to 3 years before they were large enough to flower and sell. The supply of rare tulips was, by its very nature, incredibly small and incredibly slow to increase. So why did the mania happen? How could a market move so fast when its underlying asset grew so slowly? The why's the great, willful delusion at the heart of the bubble. The speculators, in their frenzy, had to completely detach the financial instrument, the paper contract, the wind from the physical object. They were not trading tulips. They were trading the idea of tulips. The market became a self-referential game, where the only thing that mattered was the price of the contracts, not the availability of the bulbs themselves. Growers, the men on their knees in the mud, were in a strange position. They knew the truth. They knew that there would never be enough Semper Augustus or Viceroy bulbs to satisfy all the contracts being written. Some undoubtedly tried to warn people, but their cautious, earthy wisdom was no match for the intoxicating roar of the crowd. Others were happy to take the speculators' money, selling their future stock for incredible prices. But they all understood the fundamental, terrifying disconnect between the frantic pace of the market and the slow, deliberate pace of the earth. The entire financial edifice was built on a lie that nature could be hurried. It was built on ignoring the mud, the rot, the mice, and the 7 long years of waiting. It was a market that had forgotten the smell of the soil and was instead intoxicated by its own increasingly abstract and meaningless promises. Let us step back from the mud and the markets for a moment and consider the flower itself as a symbol. For an object to inspire such collective madness, it must do more than promise wealth. It must capture the imagination. The glamorous illusion of the tulip in the early 17th century was that it was a symbol of exotic love, of sophisticated beauty, and of a deep connection to the poetic world of the East. It was not just a flower. It was a story. Imagine you are a guest in a wealthy Amsterdam home, long before the speculative frenzy has reached its peak. Your host, a learned man who corresponds with scholars and diplomats, leads you into his private study. The room smells of old paper, leather bindings, and spiced wine. He doesn't show you a chest of gold or a new painting. Instead, he reverently opens a small, carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, is a single tulip. He tells you of its origins in the gardens of the Ottoman Sultan, a place of almost mythical luxury and power. He might recite a few lines from a Persian poet, where the tulip is a metaphor for the beloved's perfect face or a drop of a lover's blood. The flower in this context is imbued with a sense of romance, of mystery, of a world far more ancient and poetic than the sober, mercantile reality of the Netherlands. To own one was to own a piece of that mystique. It was a declaration that you were not just a merchant, but a man of culture, a connoisseur of rare and profound beauty. Tulip was a conversation piece, an object of refined passion. This was its initial, powerful charm. It was seen as a symbol of pure, almost divine love and beauty. But as the mania took hold, the meaning of the flower began to warp and distort. The shocking reality is that this symbol of love quickly became a notorious mark of human folly, a public emblem of greed and stupidity. The transformation was swift and brutal. The very same object that had once signified refined taste now signified reckless abandon and moral decay. You can see this shift happening in the language of the time. Pamphlets and satirical plays began to appear, mocking the tulip traders. They gave the flowers new, satirical names. A famous tulip once called the paragon of flowers might be nicknamed the fool's head. The traders, once seen as bold investors, were now depicted as drunks, madmen, and gamblers led to ruin by a worthless weed. Most famous of these satires was a book called The Rise and Fall of Flora, which personified the flowers and had them engage in ludicrous, self-important debates. Flora, the goddess of flowers, is shown promoting the tulip trade, only to be cast down in the end, her name forever associated with financial disaster and foolishness. The tulip was no longer a drop of a lover's blood. It was the root of all evil. What caused this dramatic reversal? The why lies in the deep-seated moral and religious anxieties of Dutch Calvinist society. The pursuit of wealth was acceptable, even seen as a sign of God's favour, but it had to be earned through hard work, thrift and tangible production like our weaver at his loom. The windandle was the absolute antithesis of this ethic. It was seen as creating money from nothing, from mere wind. This felt like a moral perversion, a dangerous and blasphemous illusion. Religious leaders began to preach sermons against the trade, comparing it to gambling and warning that God would punish such vanity. As the prices reached ever more absurd heights, the tulip became a focal point for a much broader cultural anxiety about the new, dizzying wealth of the Golden Age. They losing their souls in the pursuit of luxury? Was this sudden, fabulous prosperity a blessing or a curse? The tulip, in its perfect, useless beauty, became the perfect symbol for this debate. It produced nothing. You couldn't eat it, as our sailor discovered. You couldn't build with it. You couldn't wear it. Its only value was its beauty and its price, which made it the ultimate symbol of pure, unadulterated vanity. The shift in the tulip's meaning was society's way of grappling with a new and terrifying form of capitalism that seemed disconnected from physical reality. By turning the tulip into a symbol of folly, they were trying to reassert their traditional values. They were trying to convince themselves that this was a momentary madness, an aberration, and not a frightening glimpse into the future of their economy. The beautiful, exotic lover had become a painted, dangerous fool. And soon, the laughter and mockery would give way to a stunned, awkward silence as the whole impossible dream came crashing down. Now, you are back in that smoky Harlem tavern. It is early February, 1637. The peak of the mania. The noise, the heat, the frantic energy are all still here. But something is different. A new, sharp edge of desperation has crept into the air. The laughter is a little too loud, the bidding a little too reckless. The glamorous illusion has always been that this party can go on forever, that prices will always rise. As long as you can sell your contract to a greater fool for a higher price, you are safe. The system is built on a foundation of collective, unwavering belief. The upward climb has been so steep for so long that the idea of a reversal feels not just unlikely, but impossible. The very air seems to thrum with the promise of infinite profit. You watch as a trader, his face slick with sweat, tries to auction off a contract for a prized Switzer bulb. A few weeks ago, this would have sparked a bidding war. But tonight, the response is muted. A few low offers are made, but they are far below the seller's expectations. He shouts, he cajoles, he tries to whip up the crowd's enthusiasm, but he is met with a strange, unnerving quiet. Men who were once eager to outbid each other now stare into their beer steins, avoiding his gaze. The foundation of belief is trembling. No one wants to be the last, greatest fool left holding the bag. The great crash of the tulip market was not a single, dramatic event. There was no Wall Street bell, no sudden, cataclysmic announcement. The shocking reality is that the collapse was a quiet, creeping, and profoundly awkward affair. It began here, in the taverns of Harlem. It wasn't a bang, it was a whisper. A rumor. A hesitation. It was the sudden, silent, and collective realization that the emperor had no clothes. One day, a few key buyers simply didn't show up. An auction failed to produce a single bid, and the silence that followed was deafening. Panic spread not like a wildfire, but like a slow, creeping rot. A man who had bought a bulb for 5,000 guilders tried to sell it, and found the best offer was now 4,000. In a panic, he sells, taking a loss. The buyer, seeing the price drop, gets nervous and quickly tries to sell it himself, now accepting 3,000. Suddenly, everyone was trying to sell, and no one wanted to buy. The wind that had held prices aloft simply vanished, and the paper contracts became what they had been all along, worthless promises. Within a few weeks, the prices of even the rarest bulbs had fallen to a tenth or even a 20th of their peak value. The weaver who had traded his loom for a bulb now found his precious flower was worth less than a single bolt of cloth. The clerk who bet his future on a piece of paper was now facing a debt he could never hope to repay. The collapse was a social catastrophe, a wave of silent, personal ruin that washed over the country. Why did it happen with such stunning finality? The why is in the psychology of the bubble itself. A speculative bubble is not inflated by fundamentals, it is inflated by emotion. Its value is purely psychological. And just as collective belief can create astronomical value out of thin air, a collective loss of belief can make it vanish in an instant. There are likely some external triggers. Perhaps an outbreak of the plague in Harlem made people more sober and less inclined to gamble. Perhaps a group of major investors decided to cash out at the same time. But the ultimate cause was the internal fragility of the market itself. It had risen so far, so fast, that it was detached from any conceivable reality. It didn't need a push to fall, it simply collapsed under the weight of its own absurdity. The aftermath was a state of stunned disbelief. Men who had thought themselves rich were now destitute. The country was littered with unenforceable contracts and broken promises. The social fabric, woven together by trust and credit, was torn apart. The scene in the tavern is now transformed. The frantic energy is gone, replaced by a sullen, angry silence. Men sit slumped at the tables, staring at their worthless pieces of paper. They are not just facing financial loss, they are facing a profound sense of shame. They had been so smart, so bold, and now they were revealed to be fools. The silence is thick with blame, with regret, and with the dawning, horrifying question, what happens now? Who is going to enforce these thousands of ridiculous, impossible deals? The silence of the tavern gives way to the anxious, murmuring halls of justice. You find yourself in a city courtroom. The room is panelled in dark wood, and stern-faced magistrates sit on a raised platform, their expressions a mixture of wariness and contempt. The glamorous illusion of the law is that it is a bastion of order, a place where contracts are sacred and obligations are enforced without fear or favour. It is the ultimate backstop, the mechanism that ensures society doesn't collapse into chaos when trust breaks down. The people flooding these courts are ruined buyers, and the furious Selashiv come here seeking that certainty. They are waving their tulip contracts, scraps of paper signed in a drunken haze, and demanding that the judges force their counterparties to honour the deals. Believe the full weight of the Dutch legal system will come down on their side and make them whole again. A weaver, perhaps the very same one we met earlier, stands before the judges. His face is pale, his hands tremble. He holds a contract stating that a wealthy merchant owes him 4,000 guilders for a viceroy bulb. The merchant, standing beside him, coolly admits he signed the contract but now refuses to pay, arguing that the bulb is now worth less than 400 guilders. The weaver, his voice cracking, pleads with the court. A deal is a deal. A promise is a promise. He has come here for justice, for the enforcement of the black and white letters on the page. He believes in the sanctity of the contract, the bedrock principle of this great trading nation. But the shocking reality is that the courts refuse to get involved. Judges, looking down at the chaos, made a stunning and pragmatic decision. They would not enforce the vast majority of these tulip contracts. They looked at the wind handle, the trade in promises for bulbs that the seller didn't own, and declared them to be nothing more than gambling debts. And just as a modern court might refuse to help a bookie collect from a gambler who can't pay, the Dutch courts essentially threw up their hands. They classified the contracts as matters of pure chance, and therefore outside the protection of commercial law. The judges would lean forward and ask the merchant, "Did you ever see the bulb?" "No, Your Honour." Then they would turn to the weaver. "Did you ever actually own the bulb you were selling?" "Well, no, not yet, Your Honour." The magistrates would then dismiss the case, telling them to sort it out amongst themselves. They offered no remedy, no enforcement, no justice. The legal system, that great bastion of order, simply turned its back on the entire mess. For the thousands of people who had been ruined, this was a devastating blow. Contracts they had believed to be ironclad were suddenly revealed to be meaningless. The system they had trusted to protect them had abandoned them completely. What was the why behind this extraordinary legal decision? It was a masterful act of social self-preservation. The judges and the political elite recognized that to enforce these contracts would be to legitimize a madness that had threatened the country's economic and moral stability. More importantly, it would be utterly ruinous. Enforcing the peak mania prices would have triggered a wave of bankruptcies that would have cascaded through the entire economy, bringing down solvent merchants and artisans alike. It would have meant debtors, prisons overflowing, and society grinding to a halt over a flower. By declaring the wind handle to be unenforceable gambling, they performed a kind of radical surgery. They isolated the sick part of the economist's speculative futures market and severed it from the healthy part, which was the trade in actual, physical goods. If you had a contract for a real bulb that was to be delivered from the ground, the courts might help you. But if you were trading in wind, you were on your own. This decision effectively nullified the vast majority of the speculative deals. It was a pragmatic, if brutal, solution. It allowed society to take a collective mulligan, to pretend the worst of the madness had never happened. It forced buyers and sellers to renegotiate, often settling for a small fraction of the original contract price, just to be done with it. The legal system chose social stability over contractual principle. It was a recognition that the law must sometimes bend to prevent society from breaking. It's left a void, a vacuum of blame. If the courts wouldn't punish anyone, then who was responsible? Society, as it always does, went looking for scapegoats, and the artists were more than happy to provide the pictures. The cold, unforgiving halls of justice fade, and you find yourself in a bustling print shop. The air is sharp with the metallic smell of ink and the rustle of cheap, thin paper. A hand-cranked press groans and clatters, stamping out broadsheets and pamphlets by the hundred. After the crash, this is where the final battle of tulip mania was fought, the battle for the narrative. The glamorous illusion that everyone likes to believe after a financial disaster is that it was the fault of a few bad actors. We want to believe that the system itself is sound, that the majority of people are sensible, and that the catastrophe was caused by a small group of uniquely greedy, foolish, or malicious individuals who hijacked the market. It's a comforting thought. It allows society to identify and punish the culprits, learn a simple lesson, and move on with a feeling of restored order. People wanted a simple story with clear villains. You see this desire playing out in the prints being hung up to dry on lines strung across the room. They are crude, satirical cartoons, the political memes of the 17th century. One popular print depicts a fool's wagon, or Flora's Marluigen. Wagon is filled with foolish tulip traders, wearing jesters' caps and waving flowers. They are being led by Flora, the goddess of flowers, who is now portrayed as a fickle, air-headed hussy. With them are characters with names like Lies Without Shame and Greed. The wagon is rolling at full speed toward the sea, a clear metaphor for the coming crash and ruin. The message is simple and satisfying. These people, these specific fools in the wagon, are to blame. They are the weavers, the tavern drunks, the greedy speculators who drove the economy off a cliff. The respectable merchants and magistrates who look at this print can nod in agreement, plucking their tongues at the foolishness of others, feeling secure in their own wisdom. But now, let's look closer at these images and peel back this easy, blame-shifting fade. The shocking reality is that these satires were not just pointing fingers at a small group of lower-class gamblers. They were a form of collective, nervous laughter, a way for an entire society to process a shame that was shared by almost everyone, from the highest to the lowest rungs of the ladder. The secret truth is that everyone was in the wagon. Look again at that print of the fool's wagon. Tucked in among the weavers and drinkers, if you look closely, you can often find figures representing lawyers, doctors, and wealthy merchants. The artists, in their clever way, were hinting at the much more complicated truth. The greed was not confined to the taverns. The weaver who traded his loom was a fool, yes, but what about the wealthy merchant who accepted the loom in trade, knowing the bulb's value was pure fantasy? Who was the greater fool? The art was a collective projection of guilt. By creating these images of the other foolish speculator, the middle and upper classes, who had also been deeply involved, were able to distance themselves from their own folly. They were essentially drawing a picture of their neighbor and saying, he is the one who was truly mad. The why behind this artistic scapegoating is a fundamental aspect of social psychology after a bubble bursts. No one wants to admit their own greed or stupidity. It's far easier to blame a specific, identifiable group. The lower-class artisans and tavern dwellers made for perfect scapegoats. They were less powerful, and their participation was more visible and raucous. It was easy to paint them as the source of the irrationality. This narrative allowed the more respectable participants, the magistrates who turned a blind eye, the regents who dabbled in the trade, the wealthy merchants who profited early and got out to wash their hands of the affair. Satirical prints and pamphlets were a crucial part of this social cleansing. They created a shared, simplified story that everyone could agree on, a story that located the blame conveniently elsewhere. It was a form of mass therapy, allowing the nation to laugh at its own reflection in a distorted funhouse mirror. By mocking the fool, they were subconsciously mocking a part of themselves, and in doing so, containing the shame and allowing for a return to normalcy. The folly was real, but the art helped to frame it as a brief, carnivalesque madness that had temporarily possessed the lower orders, rather than a systemic failure that implicated the entire nation. But even as the laughter faded and the broadsheets yellowed, something of the mania remained, a faint, lingering scent that would never quite disappear from the Dutch air. The clamour of the print shop fades into a quiet hum. You are standing once more in a modern Dutch garden. It is spring. The air is cool and fresh. Rows upon rows of tulips stand in perfect, disciplined ranks, a breathtaking sea of colour. There are reds so deep they are almost black, yellows as bright as the sun, and delicate pinks and whites. This is the glamorous illusion of the aftermath, that the tulip mania was a bizarre, isolated episode, a brief, fiery fever that was cured and left no trace. History remembers it as a curious anecdote, a cautionary tale about bubbles. The Dutch tulip industry, in this light, is a story of recovery and triumph. They learned their lesson, the story goes, and went on to build a rational, stable and globally dominant flower industry. The madness is over. The beauty remains. You watch as tourists wander through these fields, snapping photos, marveling at the sheer spectacle. They buy postcards and small bags of bulbs to take home. The tulip is now a benign and cheerful symbol of the Netherlands itself, as harmless and iconic as a windmill or a wooden shoe. It represents a nation's horticultural genius, its ability to bring beauty to the world. The dark, frantic history of the windandel feels a million miles away. The flower has been cleansed of its past, its fragrance now purely one of innocent, natural beauty. It is a story of a happy ending, a folly overcome by pragmatism and good sense. But if you linger here as the sun sets and the crowds depart, you can sense the shocking reality that lies beneath this peaceful, colourful surface. The mania never truly ended. It just changed its form. The ghost of that speculative fever still haunts the very soil beneath your feet. The truth is, the Dutch fascination with turning potential into profit, the core driver of the mania, did not disappear. It became the engine of modern global finance. The techniques, the mindset, the very language of the windandel futures, contracts, options, speculative bubbles are now fundamental components of the world's economy. Tulip traders in the smoky taverns were not an anomaly. They were unwitting pioneers. They were practicing a form of raw, unregulated capitalism that the world would later formalize, package and sell on every stock exchange from New York to Tokyo. The mania wasn't a strange, one-off event. It was a dress rehearsal. The why of this lingering influence is that the tulip mania revealed a fundamental, and often uncomfortable, truth about human nature and economics. Value is a story we agree to tell ourselves. The price of a company's stock, a cryptocurrency or a complex derivative is in many ways just as much a product of collective belief and speculation of wind as the price of a Semper Augustus bulb was in 1636. The Dutch didn't stop speculating after the crash. They just found new, more sophisticated things to speculate on: spices, shipping routes, government bonds, and eventually, the shares of companies that exist only as lines of code. The spirit of the windandel is alive and well. It is in the breathless financial news reports about a soaring tech stock, in the online forums where people urge each other to buy into the next big thing, in the gut-wrenching fall when a bubble inevitably bursts. We may have changed the commodity from a flower to something more abstract, but the underlying emotions are greed, the fear of missing out, the intoxicating hope of getting rich quick are exactly the same. The tulip mania wasn't a strange aberration from the past. It was a prophecy. It was a glimpse into the thrilling, beautiful, and terrifyingly fragile nature of the modern world we have all built. The scent of that frantic ambition, born in the mud and taverns of 17th century Holland, still lingers in the air. The smell of risk, the perfume of potential, the faint, ever-present scent of the bubble waiting to burst. As the last light fades from the tulip fields, the vibrant colours dissolving into shades of grey, you feel the chill of the evening air. The story of the tulip is not just a story about a flower, but a story about us. It's a story of our ability to see incredible beauty in a sickness, to build fortunes on a puff of wind, and to believe so powerfully in a shared illusion that we can make it, for a little while at least, completely real. The journey that began with a humble brown bulb on a damp dock has spiraled through gardens and taverns, through science and art, through ruin and recovery, only to lead you here to this quiet field, where the ghosts of that past are still whispering on the breeze. The world settles around you now, the frantic energy of the past softening into a gentle, quiet echo. The sharp edges of the story begin to blur, like a watercolour left in the rain. The shouting in the town fades to a distant murmur, the vibrant, diseased petals of the Semper Augustus soften into a dream of colour, and the heavy weight of a ruined fortune becomes as light as a single drifting feather. The fever has broken. Panic is over. There is only the quiet of the fields now, the soft rustle of leaves, and the deep, peaceful silence of the earth that holds the bulbs, sleeping and waiting for the sun. There is nothing left to do now but rest. Let the last vestiges of this strange and frantic history dissolve into the background hum of the night. All the striving, all the ambition, has come to this peaceful end. Close your eyes and breathe in the cool, clean air. There are no more contracts to sign, no more bids to be made. There is only this moment of profound and welcome calm. End of script. Sweet dreams.